Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Nick Files. I'm your host, of course, Nick Muley. So for today, we're going to be talking about, I don't know if many of you guys have really heard of this case. It's called the Herman House Poltergeist, or Popper, as it's sometimes been known. Um, before we get to today's slideshow, first off, I actually just want to go through a little bit of what we were talking about from last week's show. Hello, Natalie. Good to see you. So I know I said right near the end of last week's show, I did have a video clip that I was going to show that was in regards to the investigation that took place at the Entity House that occurred in Culver City, California, back in the 70s. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to show it last week because obviously, I was out of time. There was another show behind me, and it's a 10-minute clip. So I'm actually gonna let me get the screen share. So we're gonna start off with that for today before we get to today's slideshow. Another word of note. My slideshow originally, I tried going as fast as I could with this, but originally this was actually going to be the last episode of season 1 of the Nick Files. Um, it looks like already. I guess I was wrong. It turns out. Looks like this might become a two-parter. Actually, no, this will become a two-parter. Let's just put it that way. Good to see you, Cheyenne. So, okay, so let me get the screen set, and then now you guys can get a rare. This is like I said, this is a rare interview involving Dr. Barry Taff and Carrie Gaynor that were involved in the Entity case back in 1974. Now they don't fully talk about about the Entity haunting. They also talk about a few of their other cases, but it's a really interesting clip regardless. So let me just get the set, and hopefully you guys enjoy this because it's really fascinating stuff. Wait a minute. Is this okay? Hang on. It's always the case with this type of issue. Give me a second here, guys. Every single time there's always an issue with PowerPoint or something like that. Damn it. All right, now let's try that again. Okay, here we go. Now it should be working. All right, so here is the video. Okay.
Night falls in the city, and with it descends a shroud of mystery. There are ghosts in our city of angels, and there are those who hunt them.
Through the parapsychology laboratory here at UCLA, we investigate many types of phenomena, a good part of which concerns the investigation of haunted houses, ghosts,
how young Barry Taff was.
Poltergeist phenomena. This takes up about 40% of our time, most of which is at night. Come into the lab and people complain about strange things going on in their houses.
Carrie Gaynor.
We'll generally answer almost any call referring to haunted houses or poltergeist phenomena. And the procedure we go through is to go out and interview the people and try and determine within that interview whether we think they're crazy or not, or whether we think they're trying to put us on, or whether we think there's something worthwhile. And if we think there's something worthwhile, we'll then place ourselves in the environment until we experience something. Once either Barry or I have experienced something, either visual or audible, we'll then try and start a full-scale investigation. It's said that, or it's believed among researchers in this field, that this type of phenomena is not dangerous. Well, generally this is the case. However, I myself ran into an investigation back in 1970 where I almost met my own demise. It was a house in Inglewood, very close to this forum. And we conducted a seance there, and it was a great deal of very hard evidence that the house was indeed haunted. Well, one of the people became possessed, and I'll use that term in quotes because it's a very loose term. But he became possessed to the point where the image we were seeing attacking me was that of an old man with gray hair, eyes bloodshot, bulging, yelling, "Get out of my house." He jumped me, he knocked me down, he strangled me. It took 6 grown men to beat him off me physically. And after he was beaten off me,
half of the people present, there were like 15 people, saw the image, this apparition of this large man just fade away, and beneath him was the 25-year-old grandson who brought us to the house.
The major motivation for people calling our lab and complaining about haunted houses is fear. Sometimes it's curiosity, sometimes they want to know just what's going on, but generally they're frightened, and that's why they call.
When I was starting to go to bed, and I sit on the end of the bed and winding the clock. And
This
I know
must be one of their other
because I was
cases.
sitting there winding the clock. So anyway, I put the clock down, I turn around, and here's this, what would you call it, man, I guess, standing in a kind of a flowing robe type of thing. And I grabbed the flashlight, and I turned the flashlight on, and it disappeared. And this started it for me.
This man sort of glowing, like
No,
if he was,
no, just like a person standing there in a robe.
and he was
I couldn't
solid,
see any face,
looked like solid to you.
It was solid.
It was a normal human being.
which made me sleep for a year with a light on.
I was in the bathroom at the time. It was like 3 a.m, and all of a sudden our hallway used to be tile. All of a sudden I heard hard shoes going down the hallway. And the first thing I said was, gee, somebody's broken into the house, And I was sitting there. I was in the bathroom for about a half hour, just hearing clump, 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 all up and down, up and down. Finally get up the guts enough to look outside, and I turned down, and all I heard was, the moving down the hallway. Nobody was in the hallway, So then I decided that my parents weren't as crazy as I thought they were.
I was giving my little one a bath, and I came out to put the dirty clothes on the bar, and my older son, Skip, was sitting over here, and I went to put him on the floor, and they just took off and just went, and he yelled at his father, "Hey, Dad, look at that," and it just zoom.
Do these things frighten any of you? Do they scare you at all?
Not really. I think it did in the beginning.
It's more of a mischievous prank playing sort of to me that would annoy you. Would you say more than frighten, or?
Well, I think it's really not annoying. I think it's very interesting.
The original belief regarding poltergeists was that they were basically mischievous prank-playing ghosts. That's what the German word means. The modern theorists in parapsychology consider a quite different type of belief system is operating here, or phenomena is operating. They believe that there are young children present, pubescent, adolescent children, and the research tends to support this belief. These young children are present with a lot of emotional animosities, belligerence, a lot of very intense interactions, and this emotional interaction will produce a emission of unconscious energy from these children, which will affect matter, objects around them.
That's because this was shot in the
electrical
70s.
Appliances, make them turn on and off, make things speed up and slow down, affect televisions, affect radios, dishes may explode, furniture may move across the room, cameras may go off by themselves, light bulbs may explode suddenly.
Catching a ghost is more than just an idle dream for Barry and Carrie. They have a plan and a means of enacting it, as you'll see in a moment.
Now, I think this is where they start talking about the entity case.
For thousands of years, people have been claiming to experience all kinds of strange things. And the experiences under the heading of haunted houses or poltergeist phenomena have generally been reduced to subjective experiences such as hallucination, fraud, dream, illusion. And what we're trying to do is show that there is an objective reality to this phenomena, and we would like to provide hard evidence to prove this.
There is in our world today a type of imaging process or information processing system, I should say, that mimics almost entirely the appearance of an apparition or a ghost. The model that I'm trying to put forth is that of a hologram. The theoretical relationship between holographic processes or holograms and the investigations that we do, ghosts, apparitions, and poltergeists, is that the way these types of phenomena display themselves appear to be similar to holograms, in that they're three-dimensional forms which sort of float in space, and they have all the physical, or I should say optical properties of real substance, but there's no matter, no mass to them. And holograms seem to mimic this type of information theory or process. But the important thing is that when you take a hologram of an object, you make a hologram of an object, that the laser light bounces off the object that you're photographing, reflects off it. Therefore, that if we were to photograph successfully an apparition with laser light, of making a hologram of it, this means that something must have been in that space to reflect the light off of. It is not coming from the object, but the light is reflecting off something, which means for some amount of time in that space, something physical occupied it, or else the laser light wouldn't have bounced off it. This type of proof or verification cannot be obtained with conventional photography, And that's our hope, that with lasers and by using holographic technology, we can supply proof beyond the shadow of a doubt that this phenomenon is indeed real.
Proof of another kind was
Yep.
found in this rather unremarkable house in Culver City.
Yep, here it
where
is.
Ghost hunters took photographs that speak for themselves.
In this first photograph, this is a control picture. We have the room with the only available lighting is a candle. We have the occupant of the house, the corner of the room where the phenomenon appears to manifest. Within a few minutes, she said there was activity in the room, the stench was present, the icy cold came in. We took a picture, we got a total bleaching effect here, or fogging. Within a matter of minutes, the same effect disappeared. Another picture revealed a perfectly normal environment, no fogging, no bleaching, as you can see, and we have no explanation for this whatsoever.
Okay, now in the next picture, we felt a cold breeze of air coming through the door, accompanied by a horrible stench, and we fired the camera in the direction of that breeze. We saw nothing, but the camera picked up a ball of light floating underneath the door. In the next picture, the lady screamed out, it's right in front of my face.
It's doors.
The word face is very important because that's the thing that was bleached out. You can see detail in the curtains here, but her face is totally obliterated. In the next picture, which was shot about 3 seconds later, she said that the phenomenon was gone. It's no longer here. That picture came out perfect.
Another picture, this one snapped by a professional photographer at that same seance.
Oh, it's the famous
captured
photo.
something that no one in the room had seen. An arc of light, which literally frames the subject of the haunting. Sometimes the evidence is even more substantial than a photograph.
Without a doubt, one of our most phenomenal cases took place in Pacific Palisades, California, back in 1970. We investigated a house where they were claiming to see a conquistador walk around. They had cold spots in front of their bed. They had objects moving from one room to the other very
So like
rapidly.
2 minutes
The
left.
conquistador was speaking to them in Spanish. Well, we never observed anything, but many months later, they discovered that their house was on the site of a Spanish burial ground, and they found the bones and they found armor of a conquistador right under their house. And I think that is very, very good verification of this type of phenomenon.
I'm intrigued by the idea that something survives death, and I think that it's a much better explanation than the idea that we end when our body stops. So as far as whether I believe in ghosts myself, let's say that I'm more intrigued by a theory of discarnate intelligence than I am by a theory of poltergeist.
There are places in Britain, in Hawaii, all over the earth, even in this country, that are chronically haunted. And the phenomena does not typify what you call poltergeist. So when you say, do I believe in ghosts? When someone asks me that question, I come up with saying, perhaps. The evidence is very suggestive that we don't stop our physical, with the death of our physical body.
In this high-speed, computerized, technically proficient world, there are those occurrences which resist explanation, posing questions for which there are no universally acceptable answers. Some will say they are caused by ghosts. Barry and Carrie won't say for sure that there are ghosts, but they are determined to unravel the mystery which surrounds those events we label supernatural. Truly high and worthy ambitions in the spirit of night-stalking tradition.
Wow, that was very interesting. I only saw part of this clip, to be honest with you, just really focusing on the Culver City case, but that was quite the interesting story that they said. Just before we get started with the presentation, I just want to say, you just give some other shout outs. Everyone looks so fly in it. Pickle Tom, what's going on? All right, so now with that out of the way, let me get the next presentation up, and then we'll get started. And like I said, for those who just tuned in, Tom, if you're still watching, I know I sent you a message a few days ago regarding this, but looks like this episode is actually going to have to be a two-parter because the slideshow that I'm going to be presenting for today is not actually fully completed. So with that being said, not only is that one of the reasons why I have to do this as a two-parter, but it actually kind of worked out really well because there's two different sides to the story that I'm going to be telling for today and next week. So you guys won't really notice that, part of the presentation is missing or anything like that. It actually ends on a really good half, for lack of better terms. So you guys will not even see the difference. So now, all right, then let's get the slideshow ready. Of course, I have to go through this difficult task as usual. Hold on one second. All right, now let's try the. Let's get the share going. All right. So, anyways, now that we got, like I said, now we got the video out of the way, we'll be focusing on today's case, which not sure if too many of you guys have heard of this case before, but we're going to be focusing on what's known as the Herman House poltergeist, or better known as the Popper case. You'll get the understanding of why it's called the Popper case, and it's basically like your typical kind of poltergeist story, but definitely one of the least known. But it had, however, inspired a very familiar movie I think most of us have seen. So, in February 1958, strange things were happening in Long Island, New York. A house belonging to a family named Herman was beset by strange and inexplicable incidents that were attributed to a ghost who was dubbed Popper for reasons that will soon become obvious. On this date, February 26th, Popper even got the attention of researchers from J.B. Rhine's famous parapsychology lab at Duke University, but they came no closer to solving the mystery than anyone else. The Popper case remains unique in the annals of the supernatural for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that this became the first haunting that was actually shown on television. Now, unfortunately, I tried searching as much as I could, and I could not find any footage, at least surviving footage, of what happened in this house. There are very few photographs, once again, involved in this case. So, what I'll be presenting is what I was able to find. I really wish there was more, and it would be awesome if there was some actual footage that I could show. Whether it's survived or not, I don't have a clue. But maybe someone out there will probably know the answer to it. So, because this was shown on television, wide-eyed audiences all across the country stared at their television screens in amazement as Popper literally performed for the cameras. These films became the ghost's claim to fame, but were only a small part of the weird happenings. Popper first made itself known at around 3:30 in the afternoon on February 3rd. The Herman family lived in Seaford, a suburb on Long Island, about 30 miles from New York City. This is the actual photo of the Herman family. It's also one of the few photos I was able to find of them. So, in fact, I was able to find a photograph with all four of them. I was amazed by it. Now, in addition to the family themselves, their white and green ranch style home at 1648 Redwood Path had been built in 1953 and contained 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a small dining room, a living room, and a basement that was divided between a utility room and a playroom. In other words, it was a typical 1950s era home in a quiet conservative neighborhood with public parks and tree-lined streets. And once again, this is an actual photo of the house that they lived in. So, and that actually was from a newspaper article, believe it or not. The Hermans were the only people who'd ever lived there at that time. There was nothing to indicate the unfinished business of some previous tenant. And you can kind of see in this photograph, the house obviously at that time looks brand new. So unless there was something there beforehand or not, I don't think there was. So the fact that the house was just built a few years earlier and they already have some kind of paranormal activity, a lot of times it's not necessarily a lot, but at various times is unusual. Now, from the beginning, February 3rd was a day like most any other. It was clear and cold outside, and Lucille Herman, a registered nurse, was there to welcome her children home from school and to prepare dinner. The children were 13-year-old, also named Lucille, and 12-year-old Jimmy, 2 ordinary kids with ordinary interests. Their ordinary world, however, was about to change. Soon after the children entered the kitchen, chaos erupted in the house. In a matter of moments, various bottles containing liquid in different rooms of the house suddenly began to pop their caps and dance around. No one saw the bottles move or explode, but all of them heard the caps as they popped loose and the bottles' contents went spewing into the air. They would later discover an open bottle of bleach in the basement utility room, a bottle of liquid starch in the kitchen, bottles of shampoo, and medicine in the bathroom. What was even more troubling and disturbing was that a bottle of holy water that had opened in the master bedroom and was lying on its side, with the contents spilled on the bedroom dresser. Each of the bottles had been sealed with twist-off metal or plastic caps. There were no corks or crimped caps that might have somehow come loose. Puzzled, Mrs. Herman called her husband, James Herman, who worked for Air France in New York City, and reported the strange popping sounds they had heard. Herman was just as confused by the incident as his wife was, but since no one had been hurt, he decided there was no need for him to go home early. James, skeptical of the whole thing, advised his family to stay calm and to keep the occurrences to themselves. He believed some prankster teenagers got inside and tried to spook the family. It was important to him to keep things under control. Following his usual schedule, Herman took the train to Long Island and arrived home just before 7 p.m. During his commute, he pondered his wife's call and was sure that he had a solution for the mystery. He also believed that some sort of chemical reaction in the products had caused the bottle lids to blow, and the fact that they did so at the same time was merely a coincidence. Perhaps it had been caused by some sort of excessive humidity in the house. He quickly investigated the bottles when he arrived home and confessed to being baffled when he found that they were screw top lids. How could they have simply popped off? The excitement over the event having passed, and since nothing more had happened, the family decided to write the experience off as just one of those funny things. Two uneventful days passed, and the popping bottles were almost forgotten. Then on Thursday, Then on Thursday, February 5th, once again, at about the same time that the Herman children came home from school, another half dozen bottles popped their lids. A bottle of nail polish burst open, as did a bottle of rubbing alcohol, a bottle of bleach, detergent starch, and the bottle that contained holy water on Mrs. Herman's dresser. It was almost an exact repeat performance of February 3rd. On Friday night, February 6th, it happened again with 6 bottles. Only this time, when the bottles began to pop open, James began to suspect that he knew the culprit responsible for the multiple containers' strange behavior. He surmised that his science-loving son had somehow rigged the bottles with humidity, or had planted some carbonated capsules with some chemical reaction inside the bottles and timed it to pop so he could get home from school in time to see the startled expression on his mother's face and to scare his family. Which, you have to remember, I have to basically put this out. You have to remember, this was 1958. So, this was, you can kind of say that although there were paranormal, investigators, and of course, obviously not to mention, horror films that revolved around haunted houses, this was still relatively at a time when not necessarily like people thinking about the paranormal was completely ignored. It's just that not too many people really bought into it compared to what it's like nowadays. So I could sure understand in this case why James Herman may have suspected that his son may have originally been responsible, but we'll move forward and you'll understand eventually how he knew it wasn't him. Then, because obviously on Saturday, February 7th, another 6 bottles popped their caps. As he developed this theory, James spent the entire weekend secretly observing Jimmy. He was determined to catch him in the act of tampering with a bottle. It's no wonder that he was surprised on Sunday morning, February 9th, at 11 a.m., when several caps popped off bottles of starch, turpentine, and holy water, leaving the containers rocking back and forth on the shelves and turned upside down. James had kept a close eye on Jimmy, so how could the boy have managed to put something in the bottles without his father seeing him do it? Feeling baffled and a bit angry, James burst into the bathroom where Jimmy was brushing his teeth and accused him of rigging the bottles to pop. The boy vigorously protested his innocence, and as if to prove the point, James was startled to see a bottle of medicine suddenly move across the top of the sink as if dragged by some unseen hand and fall into the basin as he watched in horror. A moment later, a bottle of shampoo also slid across the sink and fell with a thud to the floor. Still skeptical, surprisingly, James immediately examined the bathroom, searching for hidden rigged wires, strings, or any suspicious items. As you could probably very well imagine, he found nothing and finally realized that there were things going on in the house that he could not explain. Later that evening, the family was preparing to enjoy a meal when the popping sounds were heard again. This time, Herman investigated himself and found a mess in several rooms. Bottles were again open and upended. Unsure of what else to do, he called the Nassau County Police Department and spent the next several minutes on the phone trying to get Lieutenant E. Richardson, the desk officer who answered the call, to take him seriously. When he heard when he heard the story, Richardson accused Herman of either playing a practical joke, drinking too much, or hallucinating, but he was soon swayed by the earnest tone of the man's voice. It helped that Herman had a good reputation and was known as a respected member of the community. Richardson promised to send someone to investigate. Officer James Hughes went to the house feeling skeptical and perhaps wondering how he managed to wind up with the nutcase calls. Within a few minutes, though, he had changed his mind about the nature of the case when he heard the noises of several bottles, even capless bottles, in the bathroom popped their lids and fired them in his direction. Soon after, he performed a series of tests to rule out radio transmissions or electrical disturbances, but the bottles were not warm or otherwise charged. Whatever was happening to them could not be explained with logic. He quickly concluded that the Hermans did indeed need help. Detective Joseph Tozzi was assigned to look into the case. This was, again, one of the few photos I was able to find of actually someone who was actually involved in this case. He read Hughes' report of the incident in the bathroom with interest, while not willing to pass judgment without actually visiting the scene. He was relatively sure the Hermans were experiencing some natural phenomenon, a deteriorating house, family pranks, or were simply imagining things. Excuse me. Or he noted with the cynicism, I don't even know that word, of a veteran officer, the popping bottles could be getting some help, a human source. Or he noted with the cynicism of a veteran police officer, the popping bottles could be getting some help by a human source, but were later ruled out. Despite his best efforts, he found no evidence whatsoever of foul play and the house was not in any way deteriorating. Indeed, Tazi camped out for several nights in the Hermans' home to see if there was anything to be found. One particularly disturbing instance gave them real fright. On Tuesday, February 11th, Detective Tazi began his vigil at the Herman house. That same evening, a perfume atomizer, okay, whatever, overturned and spilled perfume in the daughter's bedroom. There was no one in the room at that time, according to reports. There was no obvious nor easy explanation for the occurrences, much to the Herman family's frustration. James still had suspicions. And blamed the occurrences on the teenage kids. Now, since going public, the incidents at the Herman home only got worse, as you could very well imagine. Over the next several days, Tazi kept track record of all the incidents in the house. The disturbances seemed to center around the bottle of holy water in the parents' bedroom. On several occasions, the lid of the bottle popped off, and once. I gotta say this because just thinking about it now, see, it's interesting of how they kind of took it. Obviously, they had a lot of concern, especially when it was revolving around the bottle of holy water when something was happening, especially like when the top of it always kept popping off. That happened today. Someone obviously would say, "Yep, that's definitely a demon, all right." I had to say that, I mean, because that's how some people just think of it nowadays. Now, in one instance, a phonograph threw itself into the air. Glass bottles smashed instantly without any touching, and after hearing the distinctive sound, James dashed into the room and found the bottle on the floor with its contents empty. He picked it up and found it strangely warm to the touch. Now, that's kind of unusual for a poltergeist case. I mean, yes, usually it's involving a lot of moving objects and whatnot, but the warmth to the touch, though, that's something I'm not very familiar with. So, I mean, I'm sure it's not the first time, but I'm sure that's relatively rare. Now, later that same day, on Saturday, February 15th, the activity took another turn. As the Herman children were watching television in the room with Mary Murtha, their middle-aged second cousin, a porcelain figurine on an end table next to the couch began to wiggle, rise up, and then shot 2 feet through the air, making a loud crashing sound as it landed on the floor. To the amazement of Miss Murtha and the children, the figurine was unbroken. She too later heard the popping and saw that the teenage kids were in another room on the other side of the house. So teenage pranks were officially ruled out. After this last demonstration, the Hermans decided to turn to another source for comfort and to aid the stumped Detective Tazi in his investigations. They contacted Father William McLeo of the Church of St. William the Abbot for help. As devout Catholics, the Hermans believe that the church could help them where ordinary methods had failed. On Monday, February 17th, Father McLeo came to the house and blessed the property, sprinkling holy water in each of the rooms to protect against whatever was causing the activity. Unfortunately, Popper, as the poltergeist came to be called, had decided it didn't want to leave. During the 2 weeks since Popper had made its first appearance in the Herman house, news of the strange happenings had leaked to newspapers, radio, and television reports. It became a media sensation around the world. And this is one of the few newspaper articles that I was actually able to find regarding the case. The story received a great deal of publicity, even meriting articles in Time and Life magazines, and credited with popularizing the term poltergeist. The Herman family became a media icon. Their story was covered publicly on multiple news outlets. This is another photo, and this, once again, I'm impressed to see that it has, well, almost all the family members except for their daughter, who was their daughter Lucille. If the Belugard family thought that mopping up spilled liquids and having their possessions broken by an unseen force was bad, then the onslaught of public attention was worse, which that's kind of the very negative side when you do receive this type of media attention. And we've seen this probably from some of our previous presentations. Of course, we've heard about it a lot of times, when it comes to certain haunted locations, but you got something going on at your house, especially in the paranormal field, that's going to draw a lot of unwanted attention. And it's amazing to me that, obviously, well, not necessarily amazing to me, but it's still is interesting to know that, even back in 1958, at a time when most people really didn't believe in this stuff, and something like this is put into the newspapers, it's going to draw a whole crowd. So it's almost like it really didn't matter what era you lived back in. Even back in 1958, you still have that same issue. And I'm sure, it was probably just as bad as some of the unwanted attention some of these places still get today every once in a while. It's not as common, but it does happen every once in a while. During the, to give some descriptions about it, during the day, the Herman home was surrounded by reporters, photographers, curiosity seekers, and an astounding array of television equipment. While the Hermans managed to get used to these intrusions into their lives, they weren't quite prepared for some of the strangeness that came with it. The Daily News reported that the Herman home had received over 300 letters from readers, and telephone calls came every day. Many of them proposed logical and reasonable solutions, while others assured the Hermans that Martians had landed nearby, or that the problem in the house was the spirit of a long-dead Indian chief, or that the Russians were tunneling under Long Island to invade New York. Readers and reporters were so captivated by the case that updates on the home sometimes made the front page news. Psychologists, too, were called to speak to the children, but again, no evidence of any wrongdoing or reasonable explanation. The Hermans managed to stay patient with everyone, though. They never turned anyone away, and they listened attentively to all the calls and the suggestions that came in, even those who shouted, "Repent," into the telephone at midnight, or proclaimed that the Sputniks are here. Many of the letters, because obviously, again, no surprise, you get that kind of attention, you're also going to get a lot of those crazy religious fanatics out there who think that, you're a product of Satan, you summon the devil. And that's obviously the case with what I'm about to read next. Because many of the letters and visitors were less easy to tolerate, however. Letters arrived in barely intelligible scrawl, condemning the Hermans for their sins and suggesting that they had invited these tricks of Satan. Ministers from all sorts of dubious faiths conducted rituals on the front lawn of the house. One man in a blue serge suit, who claimed to be a holy man from Center Moriches, a nearby town on Long Island, knelt in the yard and prayed for 10 minutes. Then he stood and announced, "Everything is all right. You have been forgiven." With that, he left. But Popper remained, and the eerie events only escalated. But not all of the suggestions and attempts to help were so bizarre. I do have to give credit, though, for the entire, Herman family, because the fact that they were able to tolerate a lot of the media that basically, hung out pretty much outside their house, as well as some of these religious fanatics, a lot of people out there, especially nowadays, usually do not want that kind of attention and pretty much try to do whatever they possibly can to keep all these curiosity seekers and onlookers away from them so they can have a normal private life. it's just amazing to me that they were able to remain patient throughout this entire, ordeal. Let me just check on the comments quickly just before I continue, because again, as usual, I'm unable to see the comments when I'm doing this. We got thank you, Gary. I really appreciate it. I would hate if all my booze bottles popped their corks. Robert, my grandfather would bottle his own ginger beer and they would explode on their own. Well, I mean, if it's something, if he intentionally did that, I wouldn't necessarily call that paranormal. Because this was obviously, like I said, a case where this happened without explanation. What's going on here? Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I realized I was pressing the wrong thing. Okay. And once again, this is another rare newspaper article I was able to find. This might be the last one that I was able to find. So definitely a lot, more than what I was expecting to find. Now, one man who came to the house, Robert Zeider, was a physicist from Long Island's Brookhaven National Laboratory. He brought a set of dowsing rods with him and went over the property with them. When he was finished, he stated that he believed that there were underground streams below the house. He thought that the water might be creating a freak magnet field. Detective Tozzi examined this idea at length, but a geological survey suggested that the information was inaccurate and as there were no streams under the house. Tozzi's case file grew thicker and thicker with added notes, observations, research, and facts that he collected. At one point, he had been walking down the basement stairs with Jimmy when a bronze statue of a horse weighing nearly 100 pounds flew across the basement and hit the detective in the legs. Jimmy had been nowhere near the statue, and no one else was down there. Tozzi had absolutely no idea how it happened. When the heavier objects started moving, he contacted the nearby Air Force to see if there had been tests being conducted, and after studying their flight plans, they had told him that sonic booms from passing jets could not have caused the disturbances, and was soon debunked. He also ruled out radio waves by contacting the Radio Corporation of America, RCA. The Long Island Lighting Company had set up a delicate oscilloscope, I think that's how you say that, in the basement, but they had detected no underground vibrations. Building inspectors from the town of Hempstead pronounced the house structurally sound. The Seaford Fire Department even inspected a well on the property to see if changes in the water level could be causing the disturbances. However, they found that the water level had been stable for at least 5 years. Although puzzled, Tozzi remained determined, and he tried valiantly to discover a source for the happenings. He finally found hope in a letter from a woman named Helen Connolly of Revere, Massachusetts. She wrote that she had experienced odd events in her living room where chairs and furniture moved about. She didn't have a ghost in her house, but rather a heavy downdraft through her fireplace. When capped with a rotary metal turbine, the flying tables and chairs ceased to fly. James immediately had one installed on his own chimney, convinced that the strangeness was finally coming to an end. Unfortunately, that wasn't meant to be. No sooner had the workmen completed the installation, a porcelain figurine launched itself from a table and smashed against a desk. The figurine had managed to travel a distance of more than 12 feet across the living room. It left a dent on the wood that was broadcast to television audiences all over the New York metropolitan area. Geez, I would like to see that footage, or even if it's just a still shot, I definitely would have liked to see how that looked. On Thursday, February 20th, events became even more violent. Another figurine was smashed against the desk. A bottle of ink popped its screw cap, then sailed into the air and splashed its contents on the wall. And a sugar bowl flew off the table and flipped 3 feet under the watch of Detective Tozzi. It had been close to Jimmy, but not within his reach. Needing a break and concerned for the safety of his family, James moved his wife and children away from the house and spent the night with a relative. Tozzi stayed in the house, but the rest of the night passed without incident and everything was normal. When the family returned the next evening on Friday, February 21st, though, the activity came back. This time, the sugar bowl again flew from the table, and this time it shattered into pieces. On Monday, February 24th, Tozzi was startled to his feet by the sound of a loud noise from Jimmy's room. No one had been in the room or near it, yet a large bookcase that had managed to fall face down onto the floor. Larger and heavier items were now being moved, upturned, and the incidents were becoming more violent. This is actually, again, this is another rare photograph of Jimmy. I think this was of the sugar bowl that he was examining that was smashed. Geez, quite an interesting finding. So, I'm trying to remember where exactly I found it, but I was very fortunate enough to find this one out of all the other photographs. The next night, on Tuesday, February 25th, while Jimmy was in the room doing his homework, his record player lifted and moved 15 feet across the room. A small statue of the Virgin Mary flew more than 12 feet and struck a mirror frame in the master bedroom. A bookcase filled with encyclopedias was upended. A heavy glass centerpiece from the dining room table flew up and struck a cupboard, chipping away a piece of molding before falling to the floor. A world globe shot down the hallway from Jimmy's room and just missed Detective Tozzi. A British newspaper photographer named John Gull from the London Evening News witnesses flashbulbs lift off a table and fly through the air to strike a wall. In addition, Popper had begun knocking on the walls to get attention, although no attempts to communicate with the ghost, if indeed it was a ghost, were ever made. Tozzi had become concerned about the new violence and the disruption. Until that point, the activity had been limited to popping bottle tops. He had explored every possible explanation he could come up with, and while he was not prepared to say that the house was haunted. He was all fresh out of ideas. What's going on, Jeremy? Good to see you. Again, just reading some of the comments here just to see what everyone's saying. So I do, again, sorry that I haven't really been responding too often. About the same time, the staff of scientists at the Parapsychology Laboratory at Duke University in North Carolina became interested in the events reported in the Herman home. This group of researchers, under the leadership and direction of Dr. J.B. Rhine, had already compiled a mass of evidence that supported the idea that certain people, under the right circumstances, could influence the behavior of objects without touching them. They called it psychokinesis, or PK. After nearly a month of terror, and as the disturbances at the home continued and in fact increased, Dr. Rhine's assistant, Dr. Joseph Gaither Pratt, traveled to New York and arrived at the Herman house on Wednesday, February 26th. He brought some of his colleagues to the house and they studied it, interviewing the family and recording some of the mysterious occurrences. Pratt believed that someone in the house was unknowingly causing the strange incidents to occur. Meanwhile, other researchers came to believe that the incidents in the house were being caused by psychic abilities, an actual ghost, a poltergeist, or noisy spirit, as we all know poltergeist is the German word meaning noisy ghosts. These prankster ghosts traditionally targeted religious items, as the disturbances had done with the holy water and the Virgin Mary statue in the Herman house. Now, I think I did talk a little bit about this last week with our presentation, but for those that didn't hear me say this last week, a lot of people obviously believe that poltergeists are actual entities. And, supposedly this is such the case. And it's usually from, people who are stirring a lot of energy. And a lot of this energy is usually negative. On the other hand, strong evidence remained for the idea that there was a human component behind the haunting. It had been noted by the Duke researchers that an adolescent child, usually a girl, was almost always among the members of the household being plagued by poltergeist phenomena. Rhine believed that the presence of the two teenage hormonal Herman children might have created and attracted the poltergeist activity or telekinetic events. Apparently, there was some conflict between James and Rhine's team as well. Adolescents are usually present in the home where poltergeist activity takes place. They believed it was possible that this young person might be capable of psychokinesis during the height of puberty. In every case, though the young person might be unaware that she or he was unconsciously causing the events to happen, making them as bewildered as the adults around them. In the case of the Herman house, Jimmy, according to Detective Tozzi's notes, that activity often happened when he was at or near the scene of the poltergeist disturbances, especially while he was alone more than 75% of the time. For many incidents, he was the sole witness. However, the detective had cleared the boy of deliberately causing any of the disturbances. Menopause has also been linked to poltergeist activity as well, or maybe between the hormonal stress of the two teenagers. Plus, mom may be going through menopause. There was a lot going on to contribute to the activity. The haunting caught the attention of paranormal investigators who did not come to a conclusion about the poltergeist one way or another. Though there was reportedly some dissent between the scientists and Herman, Rhine's colleagues began to attempt to prove that common bottles of household liquids with screw close tops don't just spontaneously pop their caps en masse. Let me just see on the comments quickly here. Okay. Like the others who came before him, Dr. Pratt was welcomed into the Herman residence and greeted warmly. He explained that he had come as an observer, and he spent most of the time there chatting with Jimmy, playing cards with him, helping him with his homework, and generally just being around the young man. There was no sign of strangeness during the visit. Popper was absolutely quiet. Pratt then summoned another colleague from North Carolina, William G. Roll. And I know he's not facing in this picture, but this was the only photograph I was actually able to find of him when he was younger, because I obviously wanted this to fit into, the whole story. It was the only photo I was able to find of him. I think this was taken back either somewhere in the late 1950s, early 1960s. Together, they interviewed the family members and were convinced that none of them were perpetrating a hoax. The family was too much shaken for it to be a colossal hoax, Pratt told a United Press reporter. Things were quiet for the next several days, as though the poltergeist did not want to perform for the scientists. Then, on Sunday, March 2nd, 1 month after Popper first arrived, it decided to make itself known again. All of the Hermans were in the house to witness what took place. First, a dish vaulted from a kitchen cabinet and shattered on the floor. Then, a night table flipped over in Jimmy's room. Popper was back, and yet there was still no explanation as to who or what it was. 2 days later, on Tuesday, March 4th, A bowl of flowers slid down the dining room table and jumped into the air. A bookcase turned over. A bookcase turned over end. It says end for some reason twice in the cellar, but this would not be Popper's farewell performance. That event would occur on Monday, March 10th, while Mrs. Herman, Jimmy, and Lucille were getting ready for bed. James was away on business. Pratt and Roll suddenly heard a loud popping sound in the cellar, and they hurried downstairs to see what it was. They found that a bleach bottle sitting in a cardboard box had somehow lost its plastic lid. For reasons unknown, this became the last act of the Herman family poltergeist, and it all stopped as quickly as it started. In all, there had been a record of 67 recorded disturbances and documented reports of unusual activities in the house between February 3rd and March 10th. The Hermans had been visited by detectives, building inspectors, electricians, plumbers, firemen, parapsychologists, and half of the nutcases on the East Coast. Although they examined the case extensively, yet none of them have been able to present a satisfactory explanation or conclusions for what had occurred in their home. This is a common thing with poltergeist cases, I think, as you all know. Once the agent, or in this case, the two teenagers, becomes aware that they are the center of the activity, it stops. While this situation seems like it happened over the course of at least a year, it was only 5 weeks. Weeks after the household returned to normal, experts, which I don't often really use very often in the paranormal field, I know a lot of us don't, still came to investigate and to theorize about what had taken place. As late as August, the scientists at Duke were still at a loss and had no clue as to what had happened, and why. By this time, the Hermans had enough of the investigations and just wanted their lives to get back to normal. James no longer cared why the disturbances had taken place. He was just happy they were over. Mrs. Herman told an Associated Press reporter, "I don't think there is a definite solution. It was just one of those things with no rhyme or reason to it. But there was a definite physical force behind it." Although the activity had all but stopped, the family eventually moved away. Which, again, I don't blame them, because even if it was all over, you're still going to have your curiosity seekers and all these other people wanting to experience something, again, as we all know. So, in my opinion, they probably did the right thing of just moving on to a different place and never return. Because to try to still live your normal life at a place where, it's got a lot of notoriety, I mean, yes, there are some people who do enjoy it because, obviously, understandably, it's opened up for investigations, ghost tours, or whatever. But for others out there, they don't want to be involved for that stuff. So for them to, if they were, if they simply had an answer to everything, to go back and try to, relive all that, I don't think it would be worth it for them. They never would fully, truly recoup their innocent lives from there. So good reason, again, it was probably for the best that they moved away. What did happen at the Herman? Now, question is, what did happen at the Herman house on Long Island? No one really knows. Popper, the poltergeist, and the strange incidents that followed in its wake is just as puzzling today as he was in 1958. The Hermans, and get this. Now, actually, let me go back just for a second, because now we're getting to something really interesting. So, I'm sure a lot of you guys have never heard of this case, but here's the really interesting fact, and I think most people don't even know this. The Hermans' experience eventually inspired the 1982 movie Poltergeist, which has a very similar story with a young suburban family experiencing strange things going on in their home, although the haunting is ramped up for the drama and scare factor. It sounds similar to what the Freeling family goes through, though. Obviously, as we all know the plot, a young, happy family moves into a new suburban home with their children and quickly notice disturbances, noises, bent utensils, objects moving about. When the activity increases, they seek help from a local university's parapsychology department who comes to investigate the house. Eventually, fed up with the lack of resolution and the disappearance of their daughter, they seek out a psychic who helps them cleanse the house. Obviously, Poltergeist is more sensationalized than the story of the Hermans. Some aspects of Poltergeist, however, weren't necessarily taken from the Hermans case. Let me just see how much time we have left. Okay. Still got enough. Now, I'm sure, obviously, after you guys have heard the full story, as you could probably as you probably have noticed, the porcelain clown, for example, was from Spielberg's own childhood, as was the tree outside the house. There are physical apparitions, Native American burial grounds, body chomping portals, and skeletons popping out of the swimming pool. Basically, the Herman story laid out the basic framework of a family being plagued by an unseen force. But that's it. Their home wasn't built on a former cemetery where they moved the headstones but not the bodies, though the Herman story was never fully explained. But as I said earlier, when the Hermans lived in this house in Seaford, Long Island, New York, back in 1958, the house at the time was only like a 7-year-old house. It was brand new. And as far as historical records go, even though it hasn't fully been explained, they said that there really wasn't any other type of buildings or anything else that may have taken place on the land before the house was built. So I could sure understand how this may have most likely came from the kids themselves. Screenwriters Mark Victor and Michael Grace investigated the story when Spielberg, who originally wanted to direct the movie, discussed the case with them in the Life magazine article. It is true, this movie was originally supposed to be directed by Steven Spielberg himself, but he was already involved in one other movie. I'm trying to remember what that movie was called. I can't think of it right now. It's like I know what it is, but I just can't remember. So as a result, instead it ended up being directed by Toby Hooper, who a lot of us know was the same director who just almost 10 years earlier directed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Hang on a second. Now, amazingly, the Herman's Poltergeist experience. Oh, yeah. Now, get this. This is something that, again, here's another cool trivia fact about this whole case. Amazingly, the Herman's Poltergeist experience only took place 5 to 7 miles from the site of the house that became the basis for the Amityville horror franchise. A fact that surprised show host and paranormal investigator Katrina Weidman. Long Island is a hot spot, and I believe it's because any place where there once were a lot of Native Americans seems to have a lot of paranormal activity. Weidman told HuffPost Weird News. The house was located at 1648 Redwood Path, Seaford. This is at the other side of where the greatest number of Indians were killed on Long Island, from where the famous Amityville house is located. The two movies made famous by the two separate movie series, I gotta say this is pretty cool. The two movies made famous by the two separate movie series are a few minutes drive from each other. The great number of Indians were killed near the corner of Merrick and Cedar Shore Roads in Massapequa, I guess that's how you say that, by John Underhill in 1653. In both the Amityville and the Poltergeist cases, an angry Indian chief was killed. This killing was done on behalf of the Dutch. The most famous sachem, chief of the Massapequa, I think that's how you say it, Indians were Sachem Takapasha. I really need to start learning these names more often. Um, who sold a large part of the area in 1658. It's kind of ironic because that was what am I thinking? Like 300 years before this whole thing occurred. Some point to Taka Pasha as being the angry Indian chief that caused the disturbances in what became the Amityville Horror and later Poltergeist. Oh, I forgot to put a fade in on this. Now, interestingly enough here, guys, although I wasn't able to find really whatever happened to really the rest of the Herman family, which I assume James and Lucille are already long gone. Ironically enough, their daughter, again, also named Lucille, is still alive. Was actually featured in an interview for a documentary in which Lucille Herman is still alive today. I'm not sure what the story is involving her brother Jimmy. I mean, whether he's still alive or not, I have no idea. But in a recent interview, the daughter Lucille Herman says she hasn't even seen the original Poltergeist, nor have her adult children. I never saw Poltergeist. I'm not even sure if my kids have seen it. Lucille told HuffPost Weird News and described the events as I felt I had my own nightmare. But when I was back in the old neighborhood, it all came back. Nothing had changed except the roof of the house. Back in 1990, the owners put a second story on the house. That made it easier. There was no emotion. But while her experience is a part of horror film history, it's not a part of the Herman family's lore. Explaining it is very difficult, Lucille says. Whether the Hermans were telling the truth or not is, at this stage, irrelevant. What it inspired is more important. Poltergeist has gone down as one of horror's finest entries and became a modern classic. Unlike Popper, the Poltergeist, that's something that can be proven. All right, guys, so it's already, let me see what the time is. Okay, it's already 5:40, so we're going to have to stop here for now. I know I still have another 20 minutes, but this is to the point where in my opinion, this is a good stop because the rest of the slideshow is still basically being put together. And honestly, where we're stopping at is actually, like I said, it's a good point because what we're going to focus on next, and this is what we'll talk about for next week for part 2. So yes, there's going to be a part 2. We're going to be then focusing on the, as we've done with a few other movies, focusing on the supposed curse of the Poltergeist movies. Again, unfortunately, I wasn't able to have enough time to complete that, which again, as soon as I get off here, I'm going to get back to work on it and get it ready. So, just see here. What's going on here? Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on here. So, let's see. Let me just give the quick shout out for everyone. Your stud muffin sugar. What the hell? I don't even know what that means. That's a lot of tongue twisting in one sentence. Okay, so yeah, originally, like I said before, this was going to be the last episode of Nick Files, but I think there's, like I said, obviously now we're going to have to make a part 2 out of this. So, but like I said, as soon as I get off here, I'm going to finish up the rest, so I'll have it ready for next week. Let me just get something ready for you guys just before we end it here. So bear with me for just a moment if I could find it, if I could find what I'm looking for, because I forgot to set this up earlier today. This is why I wasn't able to actually finish the entire presentation. So let's see, is this what I'm looking for? Okay, good. Okay. So with that being said, to kind of end for today's show, I actually do have the trailer for Poltergeist. I know a lot of us have seen it, but you guys know me. Whenever it comes to a particular film associated with these slideshows, I always have the trailer ready for you guys. So here is to end for today. Here is the trailer of the original Poltergeist, not the really bad 2015 one. Hopefully, this is the original trailer. Hope it is.
The house
Yep.
looks just like the one next to it. And the one next to that. And the one next to that. A young couple live in it. Give Ken a kiss.
You are so obnoxious.
With their 3 children.
Poor Ken. Chewy tight.
And something more.
Hello. They're here. Sweetie, remember last night? Do you remember when you woke up and you said they were here? Uh-huh. Well, who did you mean? Who's here? TV people.
Something's funny going on here next door. Something,
We were wondering if maybe you had experienced any disturbances.
what kind of disturbances?
I don't know what hovers over this house. I've never sensed anything like it. That thing is in there with my baby.
They're hungry. Now Steven Spielberg crosses a frightening new threshold into a world within our own. Its form is revealed.
What is it?
Its focus is clear. And the games are over. Poltergeist. It knows what scares you.
The other famous tagline. Okay. All right. So, like I said, we're gonna see here. Oh, wait a minute. Somehow I'm still on share. That's weird. The comment came from YouTube, but you don't have YouTube as one of your destinations. How can that be? Oh, yeah. I have no idea, Jeremy. I really don't. Oh, wait, no, no, you're right, Jeremy. Yeah, you said it was Facebook. That's what it was. And don't forget, I was sharing the link to show the trailer for Poltergeist. So it looked like YouTube. It definitely did. All right. So like I said, we're going to stop here from this point on. So, because again, I don't have the rest of the slideshow done. So like I said, I'm going to finish that up as soon as I get off here. And that will be hopefully. Oh, Jill, there you are. I've been wondering where you've been. Great trailer. Love that film. Jill, I'm surprised you weren't here earlier. You should have heard the full story about what inspired Poltergeist, which the story is a lot more different. I can tell you that. So, but anyways, like I said, with that being said, I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Of course, obviously, I'll be back on tomorrow night on Supernatural Talk with Jeremy, Eileen. I don't think Adrian's going to be coming on again. If I'm correct in that, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. Jill, of course, I'll be seeing you tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, of course, we got 13th Dimension coming up this Friday. So, but once again, as I always say, guys, I always appreciate all the time when you guys come on and check this out, because this really does, it's really a lot of work putting these presentations together. So again, I really appreciate it. It's too bad that I have to end it now, because I could see we got a lot more of a audience for, right now. Cheyenne just wrote, what did Cheyenne just say? So cannot wait for tomorrow's show. Yeah. Heard a little rewatch. Well, Natalie, I actually had given it some thought, and Jeremy, as well as everyone else on these other networks, I actually got, oh, wait a second. Hang on a second. Something's not right here. 1, 2, No, wait, no, sorry. I thought I had lesser destinations. Platforms that was broadcasting. Sorry, it's been a long day for me today. Anyways, Natalie and Jeremy, I haven't told you, I've actually given it some thought. There may actually be one more episode after next week. So, but I'm going to keep that one kind of a secret, if you will. So, it came from BB3. That's where it came from. All right, guys. Well, like I said, with that being said, I'm gonna get off here. We're gonna finish what I left off on, and I will see some of you guys tomorrow night. But if you're waiting for part 2, I will see you guys next week. So you guys all have a great night, and I'll take care. Have a good one.